Did you prefer working with hardware or software, and why?
I really started out as a hardware person because I started with electronics before computers. Computers you'd never have a hope to do in your life anyway or learn about. But when you learn how to design a computer, as I designed them over and over and over, you know exactly how the software's going to work. So I started practicing even when I had no computer I could touch. We had no computers in our high school. I was in college and I started practicing how to write the code for computers that eventually I was going to finish up in the Apple days. But I only did the code because you had to make the hardware do something for a person. I wanted my own computer. At the end of high school, I told my father I would own a 4K computer because that's enough to write a program on. And he said it costs as much as a house. And I was stunned, so I said, I will live in an apartment. I'm going to have my own computer. But a computer that's useful needs hardware and software. And I could design the hardware because I taught myself how to do that. But boy, I had to become, an expert. I had to write all the software too, where I didn't have the full solution. Yeah. But I consider myself, I would write software in the sense of what's called low level, way down knowing exactly all the little holding places for numbers called registers that are in the brains of a computer called a processor. I dealt with it very much like knowing what the hardware was doing with every little one and zero. Here's another thing, when you write software, you type it into a computer and it solves your program and it turns out a bunch of ones and zeros that will run in a machine. I could not afford to get a terminal. I couldn't afford a terminal at my house where I could type in a program over to a computer far away and that computer would give me back the ones and zeros. So I wrote it all by hand. I wrote my programs by hand on paper and then I wrote down the ones and zeros that they would equate to and I typed those ones and zeros into my computers as I developed them. I had no money. If I'd had any money, I could have done it the normal way. No, it was all handwritten.
Wow. How old were you when you learned about programming and building computers?
The first time I programmed, I was probably about 16 or 17 years old, end of high school. I think it was my senior year of high school. We had no computers in the school, but we had a great electronics teacher, and he arranged for me to go once a week and work to an industry, a company that had a computer. They would let me come in and program it.
How and when did you meet Steve Jobs?
Okay, in between my years of college, I got a job programming a computer, and one of the executives found out that I used to design computers back in high school. And I said I could never afford a chip, and he said he had connections to the chip companies. He would get me the chips if I designed a computer. Went home that night, I designed a computer, he got me the chips, and I started building it with a friend and down the street, 3 houses down. And Bill Fernandez said, you should meet this other guy, Steve Jobs, because he is into electronics, and he also plays pranks at the high school. I was known for prank playing. So Steve came over, and we just compared, we talked about pranks we had done, we talked about electronics a bit. I was the super designer. He never really designed anything, but he knew about it, knew it was important. And we talked about life in general and where it was going, how people could live counterculture. What was right, what was wrong, ways of thinking. We were very young. He was only 16 years old. I showed him the words to some songs, like Bob Dylan songs, and we became really good friends. And it was 5 years later that we started Apple.
I've read how you were able to overcome many hardware and software issues throughout the making of the early Apple computers. What role did Steve Jobs play during this time?
Steve Jobs, he played no role at all in any of my designs of the Apple I and the Apple II computer and printer interfaces and serial interfaces and floppy disks and stuff that I made to enhance the computers. He did not know technology. He'd never designed anything as a hardware engineer, and he never wrote any software. So but he wanted to be important, and the important people are always the business people. So that's what he wanted to be. I wanted to be the engineer in a laboratory, like a mad scientist. So that was my thing of it. The Apple II computer, by the way, was the only successful product that Apple had for its first 10 years. And it was all done for my own reasons, for myself, before Steve Jobs even knew it existed. So I had already created it, and it was just waiting for a company. And Steve Jobs was my good friend, the businessman.
What advice can you give to students today who want to be successful innovators like yourself?
One thing is, if you are interested in a certain subject and you read it, go read it again. If you do some homework, try to do extra homework. When I was young, I told you I got the math awards of my middle school and my high school, and when I would go home, I'd take home maybe a book on, let's say, geometry. And I would answer all the questions we were supposed to for class. And I would answer all the extra questions. I would answer every one of them. When you love something that much and you learn it so well doing that, and people would think, oh, I'm just going at a side to do what we have to do for homework, because I also have to do English homework, and I've got to do history homework, and I've got to do reading, and I don't have time. So schools don't let you explore what you love necessarily, but some of us just fall into it and want to. We just want to prove we're good at it. You can also go down to a bookstore, even a paper bookstore, and buy books, and probably online, that have a whole ton more questions in this line of physics or chemistry or whatever your favorite subject is, if it's one of those kind of subjects. Let's say that you like reading. You'll do a lot of reading, more than what the school assigns.
Yeah.
Find some of the classic books of all times. What if you want to be a writer? You sit down and just write and write lots of things. But here's how writing is creative. That's creativity. As an engineer, I was very creative. Well, let's say a writer sits down and writes a paper for school. The student can go back and say, I wonder if I could rewrite it even better and make it more concise and all that. In the old days, you had to write everything by hand, so it was hard work. And if you typed it, it was very slow. You could not make one mistake on the old typewriters. But today, go back. Maybe I'll put that paragraph before this one. It's very easy to do.
Yeah.
Think about what could I do to improve this paper, and what would make it the teacher make me think I'm even smarter than I am.
What do you think of a program like Reach a Student, where students can ask their peers for insight and help anonymously? And if you had access to Reach a Student at your school, do you think you would use it to share advice as a mentor or as a user needing help?
Being able to actually ask students what's going on, not only in school, in their life, what they're going to see, what their troubles are, what they're having, and helping them. Being a mentor is like the primary thing I want to do in the world, because mentors were so important every step of life that I saw them. And also being in touch with what young people are thinking really has led to things like the social networks and the way they work. And products from Apple Computer, Steve Jobs kept in touch with young people and what they liked. It was very much of a drive for our products.
If you could go back to your student years and change one thing, what would it be?
I like to think that I had a good mind and all my decisions were right based on what was in front of me at the time. And I don't think I would change one thing. I was athletic. I got my block sweaters. I was president of clubs. I took all the classes I loved. Maybe I didn't pay attention to Spanish as much as I should have. If I was going to pick one class, it'd be Spanish. But in later life, I made up for that. I just went back to a local college and learned Spanish, and I lived in Mexico for a while.
Finally, in your book, you mentioned how much you love doing pranks. What is the best prank you have ever done?
There's no way to put a finger on the best prank. I could come up with 100 of them if I sat down long enough. I would remember 100 of them that were all that good, kind of. I'll go back to one prank, though, I did in high school that makes me laugh to this day. And I'd forgotten about it for about 40 years, and then one day I remembered it. I knew how to get the announcements that are read to every student at the start of its school day.
Yeah.
And I got an announcement put in, said, Stanford's head janitor will speak on higher custodial education. and the vice principal didn't catch that it was a joke, and the students would laugh, and the teachers would say, no, that's serious. They make good money, and it's a respectful job. And they thought that a Stanford's head janitor really spoke on higher custodial education, the university.
Thank you again, Mr. Wozniak, for taking this interview with Reach a Student today. I really appreciate you taking time out of your day to meet with me. It's been a real honor.
Yes, I do. I try to make time whenever I can, especially for young students that are doing interviews.
Thank you.
To me, in my own family, I said the younger you are, the more you should have a decision. Your decision's more important than the older people. Also, I said that in my family that the younger should have the best computer, and the older people don't know how to use it as well. They should have the hand-me-downs. Not many people do that, but I really, anyone who was around me would tell you I've been that way my whole life. So it's an honor to be able to do this for a student.
Thank you, and I'd also like to give you your own Reach a Student mentor.
Oh my gosh!
You've been a really great mentor to millions of students like me.
Well, I hope to be as much as I can.
Thank you.